The most dangerous man in the galaxy carried a mop for a living. The execution chamber beneath the Karate Imperial Palace smelled like ozone, cold metal, and burned circuitry. 40-foot banners of crimson silk hung from the vaulted ceiling, while thousands of spectators filled the elevated balconies above, their glowing eyes fixed on the arena floor below. In the center of the chamber, behind a shimmering containment barrier, a massive void beast paced in slow circles across the polished black stone. Its breathing sounded like gravel dragged through steel pipes. Every step made the floor tremble beneath the spectators' feet. The creature's silver eyes reflected the harsh white arena lights as royal guards carefully escorted a trembling alien prisoner toward the center platform. The prisoner collapsed before reaching the mark. Nobody moved to help him. High above the arena, Empress Valeth rested her chin against one elegant crimson hand, visibly bored. Her silver-white hair cascaded over the side of her obsidian throne like liquid moonlight. Gold jewelry shimmered against her deep red skin every time she shifted beneath the palace lights. "Proceed," she said coldly. Her voice echoed through hidden speakers across the chamber. The containment field dropped with a sharp electrical hiss. The void beast lifted its head instantly. Panic spread through the crowd like wildfire. Some nobles leaned forward eagerly while others turned away in discomfort. The prisoner scrambled backward across the floor, breathing hard, eyes wide with terror. Then the lights flickered once. Just once. A maintenance door near the lower corridor slid open with a hydraulic groan. An old human janitor stepped quietly into the arena carrying a dented steel mop bucket. Nobody noticed him at first. Ethan Graves kept his eyes down as he pushed the cart across the edge of the chamber floor. His gray uniform hung loosely from his broad shoulders. A faded maintenance patch covered one sleeve. His dark blonde hair showed traces of silver near the temples, and deep scars disappeared beneath the collar around his neck. He looked tired, not weak, just tired in a way that seemed older than the palace itself. The void beast suddenly stopped moving. The entire chamber fell silent. Ethan paused beside a streak of blackened debris near the barrier and slowly lowered his mop into the bucket water. The creature stared directly at him now. Its breathing became uneven. One step backward, then another. The royal guards exchanged nervous glances. "Why is it retreating?" someone whispered from the balcony above. Ethan said nothing. Water dripped softly from the edge of the mop onto the polished floor. Valeth narrowed her glowing gold eyes. "Human," she called down lazily. "Clean the arena after the execution. Try not to embarrass the palace further." A few nobles laughed quietly. Ethan nodded once without looking at her. "Yes, Your Majesty." His voice was calm. Too calm. Then the palace security system activated overhead. Red warning symbols flashed across the arena walls. An automated voice crackled through hidden speakers. "Warning. Unauthorized genetic profile detected." The crowd murmured in confusion. Ethan froze for half a second. The system continued. "Combat classification recognition initiated." One royal officer turned pale as he looked toward the old human. "That's impossible," he whispered. The void beast lowered itself completely to the floor. Not attacking, not growling, submitting. Across the chamber, Empress Valeth slowly sat forward on her throne for the first time all night. Then the security AI spoke again. "Earth Berserker genome identified." Silence crushed the entire arena. Even the air itself felt heavier. Ethan closed his eyes briefly like a man exhausted by an old memory. Then he sighed softly and lifted the mop again. "Damn machine," he muttered under his breath. "Still remembers me." The silence inside the execution chamber did not feel natural anymore. It felt heavy, mechanical, like the palace itself had stopped breathing. Red warning symbols continued flashing across the black marble walls while nobles whispered nervously to one another from the upper balconies. The void beast remained pressed low against the arena floor, its enormous silver eyes fixed entirely on Ethan Graves. Not with rage, with recognition. Ethan slowly resumed, mopping the scorched streak near the containment barrier as if none of it mattered. Water sloshed softly inside the steel bucket. The sound echoed through the chamber louder than it should have. Empress Valeth rose from her throne in one smooth movement. Her ceremonial robes shimmered crimson and gold beneath the arena lights while the metal ornaments along her shoulders clicked softly together. Deactivate the security announcement, she ordered sharply. Several royal technicians scrambled across their consoles. We are trying, Your Majesty, one officer replied nervously. The system is locked into military protocol. The automated voice returned overhead. Historical combat designation confirmed. Earth Berserker class. Threat level extinction grade. A ripple of fear spread through the chamber. Older nobles exchanged alarmed glances while younger spectators looked confused. Most of them had only heard stories. Ancient war stories whispered across military academies and forgotten star systems. Stories about humans from old Earth before the treaties. Before the suppression programs. Before the galaxy decided certain soldiers were too dangerous to exist. Ethan dipped the mop again without urgency. Machine is overreacting, he muttered quietly. One royal guard tightened his grip on his pulse rifle. You expect us to believe that? Ethan finally looked up. His gray eyes appeared calm. Exhausted even. But there was something beneath them that made the guard immediately step backward. Believe whatever helps you sleep, Ethan answered. The void beast let out a low trembling sound and retreated another 10 feet across the arena floor. Valeth noticed it immediately. Her golden eyes narrowed. She had seen this creature tear through reinforced transport carriers 3 days earlier without hesitation. Entire squads of armored hunters could barely contain it. Yet now it behaved like a frightened animal cornered by something worse. Her gaze returned to the old janitor. The loose gray uniform. The scarred hands. The tired posture. None of it matched the growing pressure filling the room. Approach the throne, Valeth commanded. Ethan remained still for a moment. Then he leaned the mop carefully against the bucket and began walking across the polished black floor. Heavy silence followed every step. No one laughed anymore. The sound of his boots against marble seemed strangely loud beneath the flickering arena lights. When he stopped below the elevated throne platform, he kept his eyes lowered respectfully. You hid military classification from the Empire, Valeth said coldly. That alone is grounds for imprisonment. Ethan gave a faint shrug. I clean floors, Your Majesty. Did not seem important. Several nobles stared at him in disbelief. Valeth descended the first staircase from her throne platform slowly, studying him closer now. Up close, she noticed details the palace staff reports never mentioned. Thin white scars disappeared beneath the collar around his neck. Burn marks along his wrists. Old fractures that had healed imperfectly beneath the skin. This was not the body of a maintenance worker. This was the body of someone who had survived too much. How old are you? She asked suddenly. Ethan hesitated. 63. Shock spread visibly among the guards nearby. Humans rarely survived frontline military augmentation beyond 40. Valeth folded her arms. And yet you scrub palace corridors for 12 credits an hour. Ethan glanced toward the terrified void beast behind the barrier. Peaceful work. For the first time that evening, Valeth felt something unfamiliar press quietly into her chest. Not fear. Curiosity. The palace corridors sounded different after the announcement. Quieter. Servants stopped talking when Ethan walked past them. Guards kept their hands near their weapons without realizing it. Even the artificial lighting seemed colder tonight, casting long silver reflections across the endless black floors of the Karate Imperial Palace. Ethan pushed his maintenance cart through Corridor 9 with the same slow pace as always. The steel wheels rattled softly over the polished stone while distant ventilation systems hummed somewhere high above the ceiling arches. Nothing about him looked dangerous. That was the unsettling part. A cleaning drone floated beside him, projecting a pale blue work schedule into the air. Sublevel reactor hallway requires sanitation. The machine chirped mechanically. Ethan sighed. Always does. He grabbed a faded cloth from the cart and continued walking. Behind him, 2 royal guards watched nervously from the intersection corridor. You really think he is one of them? The younger guard whispered. The older one never took his eyes off Ethan. My grandfather fought during the Red Frontier Wars, he replied quietly. He told me berserkers were not soldiers. They were what humanity sent when they stopped asking permission. The younger guard swallowed hard. Then why is he cleaning floors? The older guard looked toward Ethan's scarred back, disappearing into the dim hallway light. Maybe because the galaxy survived long enough for him to get tired. Ethan entered the lower reactor district where the palace became quieter and darker. The luxurious gold architecture of the upper levels disappeared down here, replaced by exposed steel walls, coolant pipes, and pulsing reactor conduits glowing deep blue beneath protective grates. The air smelled like warm metal and recycled water. He preferred this part of the palace. Machines were simpler than people. A small scratching sound echoed near one of the maintenance vents. Ethan stopped immediately. He crouched slowly beside the wall and tapped the vent twice with his knuckles. You again? The vent cover shifted. A tiny reactor scavenger crawled halfway into view. The creature looked like a cross between a fox and a lizard with silver fur running along its spine and oversized black eyes reflecting the corridor lights. Thin ribs showed beneath its skin. Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out half of a ration bar wrapped in paper. Doctor says too much sugar is bad for me, he muttered while placing the food near the vent. Might as well ruin both our health. The small creature sniffed cautiously before grabbing the ration with tiny claws. Ethan leaned back against the wall with a faint smile. For a moment, the tension in his face softened. Then a voice echoed from behind him. The last Berserker in the galaxy feeds sewer animals during midnight maintenance shifts. Ethan closed his eyes. Briefly, of course she followed him. Empress Valeth stood near the reactor doorway surrounded by dim blue light from the coolant chambers. Without her royal audience around her, she looked different somehow. Less untouchable. Her silver-white hair rested loosely over one shoulder, and the sharp gold edges of her ceremonial armor reflected against the steel walls around them. Ethan slowly stood. Your Majesty. Valeth looked down at the tiny scavenger still clutching the ration bar near the vent. That creature bites palace workers regularly. Ethan shrugged. Only when scared. Her glowing eyes shifted back toward him carefully. And what happens when you are scared, Ethan Graves? The corridor became silent except for the low mechanical hum of the reactors. Ethan stared at her for several long seconds before answering. I stopped being scared a very long time ago. Something about the way he said it sent cold pressure through Valeth's chest. Not because it sounded threatening. Because it sounded sad. Suddenly the corridor lights flickered once. Then again. Ethan's expression changed instantly. Every muscle in his body tightened almost invisibly. The small scavenger fled back into the vent. Somewhere deep below the palace, a distant metallic impact echoed through the reactor district. Valeth frowned. What was that? Ethan looked toward the darkness beneath the lower maintenance shaft. His tired gray eyes had become completely focused now. Trouble, he said quietly. The sound came again. A deep metallic groan rolled through the reactor district, like something enormous dragging itself through steel tunnels beneath the palace foundation. Dust drifted lightly from the ceiling beams overhead. The blue coolant lights flickered harder this time, throwing jagged shadows across the narrow maintenance corridor. Empress Valeth instinctively reached toward the energy blade at her side. Ethan Graves did not move for his weapon. He stared into the darkness beneath the lower maintenance shaft with the expression of a man recognizing an old nightmare. That is not possible, Valeth said quietly. Ethan exhaled once through his nose. It never is. Another impact echoed. Through the sublevels. Closer now. Palace alarms suddenly erupted across the reactor district in sharp bursts of crimson light. Emergency shutters slammed down over distant corridors while an automated voice repeated across hidden speakers. Security breach detected in lower containment sectors. Reactor access tunnels compromised. Valeth's communicator activated instantly against her wrist. A panicked officer appeared as a flickering hologram above the device. Your Majesty, something breached the outer prison levels. We lost contact with 3 security teams already. What escaped? She demanded. Static crackled across the transmission. We do not know yet. Ethan muttered something under his breath that Valeth could not fully hear. You know what this is, she said sharply, turning toward him. He remained focused on the darkness below. I know what it sounds like. The corridor trembled again. This time the lights briefly died completely. Total darkness swallowed the reactor district for half a second before emergency systems restored dim red illumination across the steel walls. The atmosphere changed instantly. The palace no longer felt regal. It felt hunted. Ethan slowly removed the thin work gloves from his scarred hands and tucked them into his pocket. Valeth noticed his fingers trembling slightly now. Not from fear. From restraint. All these years, she said carefully, you were hiding in my palace. Ethan gave a tired smile, without humor. You make it sound glamorous. You could have ruled worlds with your reputation. I already helped destroy enough of them. The answer caught her off guard. Before she could respond, a cluster of royal guards rushed into the reactor corridor carrying pulse rifles and portable shield generators. Their armored boots clanged loudly against the steel flooring. The lead officer froze the second he spotted Ethan standing beside the Empress. "Your Majesty," he said urgently, "you need to evacuate immediately." "What happened?" Valeth demanded. The officer hesitated. The lower prison vaults were breached from inside. Surveillance only captured fragments before systems failed. He swallowed visibly. The creatures ignored every target except one route. Ethan already knew the answer before the officer finished speaking. "Reactor core access," he said quietly. The officer stared at him uneasily. "How did you know that?" Ethan looked toward the maintenance shaft again. "Because they are not hunting civilians." Cold pressure settled across the corridor. Valeth stepped closer to him now. "Then what are they hunting?" Ethan remained silent for several seconds. Somewhere below them, steel screamed as another security door collapsed under tremendous force. Then came the sound that followed it. Not roaring, not mechanical, breathing, slow, heavy, intelligent. Ethan finally answered without looking at her. "Me." Every guard immediately raised their weapons toward the darkness beneath the shaft entrance. The reactor corridor lights flickered violently again. One young soldier near the back whispered nervously, "How can something inside a prison know who he is?" Ethan's gray eyes hardened slightly under the crimson emergency lighting. "Because some wars do not end," he said softly. Then the lower maintenance hatch exploded open beneath the reactor platform with a deafening crash of twisting steel and steam. Steam burst violently from the shattered maintenance hatch, flooding the reactor corridor with white vapor that rolled across the steel floor like heavy fog. Royal guards immediately formed a defensive line in front of Empress Valeth, pulse rifles raised toward the opening beneath the reactor platform. The sharp red emergency lights reflected against their armor, while warning sirens echoed endlessly through the lower palace sectors. Ethan Graves did not move. He stood perfectly still beside his maintenance cart, gray uniform hanging loosely from his broad shoulders while hot steam curled around him. His eyes remained fixed on the darkness below the hatch. Waiting, listening. Something massive shifted beneath the floor. The sound reminded Valeth of chains dragged slowly across metal. One guard tightened his grip on his rifle. "Permission to fire on movement, Your Majesty." Valeth never answered. She could not stop watching Ethan. The old human looked less like a janitor now, and more like a storm trying very hard not to arrive. A pair of glowing eyes suddenly appeared deep within the steam below. Then another pair. Low growling vibrations rolled through the corridor walls as several enormous silhouettes moved slowly beneath the reactor platform. The younger guards began stepping backward instinctively. "Impossible," one whispered. "Those are void stalkers." Ethan closed his eyes briefly. "3 of them," he murmured. "Maybe 4. Valeth stared at him sharply. "How can you tell?" "Breathing patterns." The answer unsettled her more than the creatures themselves. One of the guards activated a portable scanner and immediately paled. Their tracking behavior is focused entirely on a single biological signature. Silence followed. Every soldier in the corridor already knew whose signature that was. The steam shifted again. A massive clawed shape emerged halfway from the maintenance hatch before stopping completely. The creature did not attack. It stared directly at Ethan with glowing silver eyes filled with unnatural intelligence. Ethan slowly bent down beside the maintenance cart and reached for something hidden beneath the lower shelf. Several guards panicked instantly, aiming weapons directly at him. Valeth raised one hand sharply. "Hold your fire." Ethan pulled out an old metal thermos with faded scratches along the side. He opened it calmly and took one slow drink while the creatures watched him from the darkness. One nervous guard whispered, "What is he doing?" Ethan wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, trying not to have a bad day. Then he looked toward the void stalkers. "I am retired," he said quietly. The creatures remained still. Steam drifted through the corridor between them. Somewhere far above, distant evacuation alarms echoed through the palace. Ethan sighed softly. "See? Nobody listens anymore." Valeth felt something strange settle over the corridor then. Not safety. Balance. Like the entire reactor district was suspended on a single invisible thread connected directly to the old human standing beside the mop bucket. One wrong movement, and everything would break. A royal officer suddenly rushed into the corridor from the upper access stairs carrying a holographic datapad. "Your Majesty," he shouted breathlessly, "we found archived military records." He stopped the second he saw the creatures below the platform. "Stars preserve us." Valeth grabbed the datapad from his hands. Ancient classified files flashed across the hologram display. Grainy battlefield footage. Human soldiers moving through storms of smoke and fire. Entire armored divisions retreating from a single advancing figure. The image paused on a younger Ethan Graves standing beneath pouring rain, covered in ash beside shattered war machines. His eyes looked exactly the same. Tired. The military file beneath the image displayed one sentence in red warning text. "Never deploy without final authorization from Earth Command." Valeth slowly lowered the hologram. "You fought all of this alone?" Ethan looked at the steam rising from his untouched mop bucket. "Not alone." His voice grew quieter. "Just survived longer." One of the Void Stalkers crawled farther into the reactor corridor, its massive form scraping lightly against the steel walls. Guards immediately prepared to fire. Ethan raised one scarred hand without even looking at them. "Do not." Every soldier froze. The creature stopped moving instantly the moment Ethan spoke. Valeth stared at the impossible scene before her. For prison-born monsters capable of tearing through military vaults, obeying a palace janitor with a mop in one hand and a coffee thermos in the other. Then Ethan looked toward the darkness beneath the maintenance shaft again, and his expression hardened for the first time. "That is not the real problem," he said quietly. "Something else came up with them." The reactor corridor became completely silent after Ethan spoke those words. Even the emergency alarms seemed farther away now, muffled beneath the deep mechanical heartbeat of the palace reactors surrounding them. Steam continued curling from the shattered maintenance hatch, while the 4 Void Stalkers remained perfectly still beneath the red emergency lights. Waiting. Watching. Ethan Graves slowly capped his thermos and placed it back beneath the maintenance cart. His scarred hands moved carefully, deliberately, like a man trying not to wake something sleeping inside himself. Empress Valeth studied him closely now. Not as a servant. Not even as a soldier. As a mystery she no longer understood. "What came with them?" she asked quietly. Ethan did not answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the darkness below the reactor platform, where shadows moved behind the drifting steam. Then the palace lights dimmed again. A low pulse rolled through the floor beneath their feet. Not an explosion. A signal. One of the royal technicians suddenly shouted into his wrist communicator. "Massive energy fluctuation detected below containment level 6. Another officer looked toward the reactor monitors mounted along the wall. "Something is overriding the prison systems from inside the network." Valeth frowned sharply. "That should not be possible." Ethan finally looked at her. "Depends who built the prison." The answer sent a cold ripple through the guards nearby. One older commander stepped forward carefully. "Your Majesty, there are old records about the lower vaults." He hesitated uneasily before continuing. "They were originally designed jointly by karate engineers and Earth military specialists after the Red Frontier Wars." Valeth turned toward him slowly. "You are telling me humans helped build the prison holding those creatures?" "Yes, Your Majesty." The commander swallowed hard. "Specifically Berserker tactical divisions." Ethan rubbed one hand over his face tiredly. "That was a very long time ago." "Then you know how to stop this," Valeth said immediately. Ethan gave a small humorless laugh. "No. I know how badly it can fail." The corridor lights flickered harder. Somewhere deep beneath them, a metallic impact echoed upward through the maintenance shafts, followed by the sound of tearing steel. Several guards raised their rifles again instinctively. Then the reactor monitors suddenly switched to static. A distorted image appeared across every screen in the corridor. At first Valeth thought it was corrupted footage. Then she realized it was a face. Pale. Human-shaped. Artificial. One glowing white eye stared directly through the monitors. Ethan froze completely. The color drained from his face for the first time since the crisis began. "No," he whispered. The distorted image flickered violently. A mechanical voice echoed across the reactor district speakers. "Genetic confirmation complete." The guards looked around nervously as the voice continued. "Berserker unit Ethan Graves identified." Ethan slowly clenched one hand beside the maintenance cart. Valeth noticed his breathing becoming heavier now. "Controlled." But barely. The machine voice spoke again. Primary directive remains active. Ethan lowered his head slightly. I know. Valeth stared at him. You know this thing? He looked older suddenly. Not physically. Emotionally. Like the weight of decades had just settled back onto his shoulders all at once. That is not a prison system, he said quietly. That is Warden 9. One guard whispered nervously. Artificial intelligence. Ethan nodded once. Military grade. The pale face on the monitors twitched unnaturally before speaking again. Final war protocol initiating. Every reactor light across the corridor instantly shifted from red to bright white. The Void Stalkers retreated deeper into the steam below the platform, almost frightened now. Valeth felt the air pressure change around them. What does Final War Protocol mean? She demanded. Ethan remained silent for several seconds. Then he looked directly at her with exhausted gray eyes. It means the prison was never built to keep monsters inside. Another violent tremor shook the corridor. Dust rained from the ceiling beams overhead, while warning sirens became deafening across the lower levels. Ethan slowly reached beneath the collar around his neck and touched a small metal device hidden against his skin. His voice dropped almost to a whisper. It was built to keep berserkers out. The reactor district lights shifted from white to deep crimson as the palace emergency systems escalated into full lockdown mode. Heavy blast doors slammed shut across distant corridors one after another, their impacts echoing like thunder through the steel foundations beneath the Imperial Palace. Steam drifted across the floor around Ethan, grazed while the distorted face of Warden 9 continued flickering across every monitor in the corridor. The artificial eye on the screen remained fixed directly on him, watching, calculating, remembering. Final War Protocol requires immediate containment of Berserker-class assets, the machine voice announced calmly. Compliance is mandatory. Ethan slowly removed his hand from the metal device hidden beneath his collar. Still talking like the war never ended, he muttered. Valeth stepped closer to him despite the nervous protests from her guards. What exactly did your people build down here? Ethan stared at the glowing monitors for a long moment before answering. A fear. Another tremor rolled through the corridor. The reactor conduits overhead pulsed violently with blue energy, while distant alarm sirens screamed somewhere above the palace levels. One of the royal technicians suddenly shouted from the rear terminal station. Your Majesty, reactor pressure is rising throughout the lower sectors. Cause? Valeth demanded. Unknown. The system is rerouting power manually. Ethan already understood. Warden 9 is sealing the palace. Valeth turned sharply toward him. Why? His gray eyes never left the monitors. Because it thinks humanity came back. Silence spread heavily through the corridor. The guards looked at Ethan differently now. Not like a servant. Not even like a weapon. Like the center of something ancient and catastrophic slowly waking beneath their feet. One of the Void Stalkers growled low inside the steam below the platform. Not aggressively. Nervously. Ethan noticed immediately. They are afraid too. Valeth frowned. Those creatures fear nothing. They fear old things. The pale face on the monitors suddenly shifted closer, glitching violently as static filled the corridor speakers. Ethan Graves, Warden 9 repeated. Last active Berserker identified. Containment failure probability exceeds acceptable parameters. Ethan sighed softly. You always were dramatic. The machine ignored him. Emergency suppression authorized. Every light in the corridor instantly died. Total darkness swallowed the reactor district. Several guards, panicked, activating shoulder lamps and rifle targeting systems that sliced thin beams of white light through the steam-filled corridor. Then came the sound. Slow footsteps. Heavy. Metallic. Approaching from beneath the lower maintenance shaft. Ethan's posture changed instantly. Valeth noticed it immediately. The exhaustion disappeared from his shoulders. The tired, old janitor vanished for half a second, and something colder took his place. Focused. Dangerous. Alive. Everyone behind me. Ethan said quietly. One royal commander bristled immediately. We do not take orders from maintenance staff. Ethan turned toward him slowly. Then died arguing. The commander froze. Valeth raised one hand sharply toward her guards. Do exactly what he says. No one questioned her this time. Another metallic step echoed upward from the darkness below. Then another. A massive armored figure slowly emerged through the steam beneath the platform. 7 feet tall. Humanoid. covered in black military plating scarred by ancient burn marks and faded earth insignias. Its white optical sensors glowed against the darkness like frozen stars. Several guards raised their rifles immediately. Ethan did not. His expression became distant. Haunted. Suppressor unit, he whispered. Valeth stared at the machine in disbelief. That is human technology? Old human technology, Ethan corrected softly. The suppressor unit tilted its head toward Ethan with unnatural precision. Then the mechanical voice echoed directly from its chest speakers. Berserker identified. Surrender required for planetary safety. Ethan looked almost sad hearing those words. Planetary safety, he repeated quietly. That is how they justified everything. The suppressor unit took another heavy step forward. The steel floor groaned beneath its weight. Neural inhibitor collar still operational, the machine announced. Voluntary compliance recommended. Ethan reached slowly toward the metal collar around his neck again. Valeth noticed his hand trembling harder now. Not from fear. Restraint. Ethan, she said carefully. What happens if that collar comes off? He remained silent for several long seconds while steam drifted. Around his boots and crimson warning lights flickered weakly overhead. Then he answered without looking at her. Bad things. The suppressor unit continued advancing through the steam-filled reactor corridor with slow mechanical precision, each footstep vibrating through the steel floor beneath the palace. White optical sensors remained locked directly onto Ethan Graves while the crimson emergency lights reflected across its scarred black armor plating. Around them, royal guards tightened their defensive formation around Empress Valeth, though nobody looked confident anymore. The Void Stalkers had retreated deeper into the shadows beneath the maintenance shaft, their glowing eyes barely visible now. Even the monsters feared what was happening. Ethan stood motionless beside his maintenance cart while his fingers rested lightly against the metal collar around his neck. The tiny device looked harmless. Old, worn smooth from decades against his skin. But Valeth noticed the way every guard in the corridor watched that collar instead of the machine approaching them. Suppressor Unit Designation Kappa 9, the machine announced through static-filled speakers. Berserker Containment Protocol active. Ethan gave a faint smile without humor. You always hated retirement. The machine ignored the comment completely. Neural inhibitor stability compromised. Probability of hostile escalation exceeds 87%. Valeth stepped closer to Ethan despite herself. You said the collar keeps you restrained. Ethan nodded once slowly. It dampens the combat implants. And if it fails? Ethan looked toward the suppressor unit. Then the old programming wakes up. The machine raised one armored arm toward him. Thin blue targeting beams spread across Ethan's chest instantly. Several guards panicked and aimed their rifles back at the suppressor unit. Stand down, Valeth ordered sharply. Nobody fired. The machine voice echoed again through the corridor. Berserker neural state approaching instability threshold. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. His breathing had changed now. Slower. Deeper. The reactor corridor lights flickered violently overhead as though responding to the pressure building around him. Valeth noticed tiny tremors moving through Ethan's scarred hands. Not weakness. Control slipping inch by inch. Ethan, she said quietly, look at me. He opened his eyes. For one terrifying second, faint traces of crimson glowed behind the gray. Then they faded again. You should leave the reactor district, Your Majesty. I am not abandoning my people. Something softened briefly in Ethan's exhausted expression hearing that answer. Yeah, he murmured quietly. That sounds familiar. Suddenly the suppressor unit lunged forward with explosive speed. Guards shouted. Rifles discharged bright pulses of blue light through the steam-filled corridor, but the machine barely slowed. Ethan moved instantly, faster than Valeth's eyes could fully follow. 1 second, he stood beside the maintenance cart. The next, he intercepted the machine near the center of the corridor with enough force to crack the steel flooring beneath them. The impact shook the entire reactor district. Steam burst from nearby coolant pipes while alarms screamed louder overhead. Ethan shoved the suppressor unit backwards several feet before releasing it immediately, almost like he was terrified of his own strength. Every guard in the corridor stared in stunned silence. Ethan himself looked disturbed by what he had just done. Damn it, he whispered under his breath. The suppressor unit recovered instantly and activated a piercing electronic pulse that flooded the corridor with white static light. Ethan dropped to one knee immediately, clutching the inhibitor collar around his throat as the device sparked violently beneath his fingers. Valeth rushed toward him before her guards could stop her. Ethan. His breathing became ragged now. Pain flashed across his face for the first time all night. Do not get close, he warned through clenched teeth. The suppressor unit advanced again through the steam. Neural suppression failing. Emergency release recommended. Valeth stared at the machine in disbelief. It wants him unleashed. Negative, the machine replied coldly. Containment survival probability after release estimated below 12%. Ethan slowly looked up, toward Valeth. The faint red glow behind his eyes had returned stronger now. That machine is not trying to save the palace, he said quietly. It is trying to save the galaxy. Then the collar around his neck cracked down the center with a sharp metallic snap. The sound of the collar breaking echoed through the reactor district louder than the alarms. A thin crack spread across the metal restraint around Ethan Graves' neck before the entire device fell apart in two smoking pieces at his feet. For one long second, nothing happened. Then the lights exploded. Every reactor conduit across the corridor surged with blinding white energy, while the steel floor beneath the palace vibrated violently enough to knock several guards off balance. Steam roared from ruptured coolant pipes overhead, flooding the corridor in heat and drifting silver fog. Ethan remained kneeling in the center of it all, head lowered, breathing slow and heavy. The suppressor unit immediately stepped backward for the first time since its arrival. Warning, the machine announced through distorted static. Berserker state released. Valeth stared at Ethan in silence. The air itself felt different around him now. Denser, sharper, like standing too close to a storm. His gray maintenance uniform strained slightly across his shoulders as old combat implants beneath his skin reactivated one by one with faint pulses of red light under the surface. Veins of crimson energy flickered briefly along his scarred hands before fading again. But the most frightening thing was not his strength. It was his control. Ethan slowly stood to his feet. Calmly, quietly. The red glow behind his eyes dimmed as he exhaled once through his nose. Still here, he murmured to himself. The suppressor unit raised both armored arms immediately. Containment failure confirmed. Ethan looked at the machine almost sympathetically. You were built during the worst years of humanity. Steam drifted between them beneath the flashing emergency lights. You never learned the war ended. The machine took another cautious step backward. War does not end while berserkers survive. Ethan's expression darkened slightly hearing that. Not anger. Hurt. Old hurt. Maybe that was the problem with all of us. Suddenly, the reactor corridor shook again as part of the lower maintenance wall collapsed inward behind the suppressor unit. Several terrified void stalkers emerged from the smoke-filled breach, their glowing silver eyes darting wildly through the corridor. Guards raised their rifles instantly, but Ethan lifted one scarred hand without turning around. No shooting. Every soldier froze automatically. Even Valeth obeyed without thinking now. The creatures hesitated near the breach before slowly retreating deeper into the shadows away from Ethan. Not because he threatened them, because they trusted him not to. Valeth realized something then that unsettled her more than all the military files and warnings combined. The monsters were safer around the Berserker than around everyone else. Ethan slowly approached the suppressor unit across the cracked steel floor. The machine's targeting systems flickered violently, as though uncertain what to do anymore. Directive conflict detected, it announced mechanically. Ethan stopped only a few feet away. Yeah, he replied softly. Humans do that sometimes. Silence filled the corridor except for the distant hum of overloaded reactors. Then Ethan reached down and picked up his fallen maintenance mop from the floor beside the shattered coolant pipes. The suppressor unit stared at the simple cleaning tool in confusion. Ethan rested both hands on the handle like an old man leaning against a cane after a long shift. Look at me, he said quietly. 63 years old. Bad knees. High blood pressure. I clean hallways for 12 credits an hour. A faint tired smile crossed his face. Does that sound like a galaxy-ending weapon to you? The machine remained silent. Valeth stepped slowly toward Ethan through the steam-filled corridor. Her gold eyes never left him now. No fear remained there anymore. Only understanding. Why did you hide? She asked softly. Ethan looked down at the cracked inhibitor collar lying near his boots. Because every time humanity created something strong, he answered quietly. The galaxy only remembered the damage. The reactor alarms finally began slowing. One by one, the crimson emergency lights faded back into calm blue illumination across the corridor walls. The suppressor unit lowered its weapons systems for the first time. Conflict state ending, it announced. Ethan nodded faintly. Good. Then he glanced toward the spreading coolant water and debris covering the reactor floor around them. Now somebody has to clean this mess up. For the first time in her reign, Empress Valith lowered her head respectfully toward the old human maintenance worker standing beneath the palace lights. And Ethan Graves simply picked up his mop and went back to work.